go now.
Okay, good morning, everyone. This is Create a World. Welcome. And my guest today is Michael Van Scriver, who is an Aruyvedic physician and clinical herbalist. For those of you who are new to Create a World, there's a group of us who collaborate on presenting ideas, having guests to showcase a lot of people's creativity and self-expression that addresses something that they want to see changed in the world. It's usually a very unique way that who they are, how they express themselves in the world. I would also say the call of God on their lives, that they just are addressing a way to impact our world in a very life-enhancing way. And Create a World is, as I said, a group of us collaborators who are part of the field of Tantra Mat, which is a phenomenon, a state of being, a field state of as above, so below, of bringing the world of paradise back to earth and awakening or recognizing the original nature of human beings, which is whole, healthy, abundant, and very different than some of the Western expressions we've got right now. So I'm very excited to have Michael join us, because I've gotten to know him a little bit over what, Michael, about a year? Has it been about a year?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. But here's what I want to talk about today. In my work with Michael, I've noticed that, first off, I want to say that I've heard of Aruyvedic medicine years ago, had almost no exposure or understanding. What little I had heard was very lovely, but I didn't have a reference point for how to, and beyond lovely, I don't mean that superficially. I mean, like, the couple things I'd heard seemed really deep, really, well, a very lovely perception of life and health and beingness in the world. But I had no idea how one would possibly access that or connect the dots here in this Western world. And then over time, different things happened. And then I got to meet Michael. And I noticed over the course of our work together that, he worked with me sorting out some health issues. And then all of a sudden, it was different. The illness injury phase was like done, but there was more west to go. And it was a different, just sudden, it was very subtle to me, but also very different, that now there's the world of, okay, that I'm not focusing on the illness and injury, but there's more health, more foundation to lay there. And it was a different reference point. Can you talk about that, Michael? What's the difference between the two? I'm going to call them kind of states of being.
Well, what you experienced, in my opinion, is a shift in your identity. And that's a continual process. I mean,
yeah,
ideally, you continue to shift your identity. But many of us form a certain understanding of who we are based upon the causes and conditions that we're experiencing. And if those causes and conditions are colored in suffering, which is true for all of us, then we identify as that. And you are starting to identify with a truer expression of Deb, a truer expression of who you are. So I think that's the marked experience and the marked change that you had gone through.
All right, I want to explore that some more, because I wouldn't have said I identified with. So in my field, as a clinical psychologist, we look at identity, and definitely as a continuum. And it's always evolving as well. But I never thought about that in terms of health. I may have said intellectually, because this part would have been intellectual only for me at the time. I would have said, you know, all my experiences, including my health experiences, my experience of body, you know, I would even have been able to say someone who's an athlete has a very different experience of body than I do, because I'm not an athlete. I used to be, you know, really active in several sports, but I don't know. It would have been, I would know that it would be different. That would be my assumption. But I would never have said that I was identifying as whatever health condition, because I don't say, you know, I am whatever the health condition is. Like, what are some of them? Like, or I don't say, if I had arthritis, I wouldn't say my arthritis. I don't, if I had whatever else, my cold, my flu, I wouldn't say it that way. I know some people do. So can you talk more about the identity part? Because that's really kind of, well, a surprise to me.
Well, truly, all disease comes from a lack of true identity, and believing in something that's false, basically. So we perpetuate this concept of a self, this independent being separate from everything else. And that idea of a self leads us down a rabbit hole that ultimately the byproduct of that is suffering. So be it a diagnosable condition such as arthritis, or just emotional distress, it's all stemmed from this idea that we exist in and of ourselves, independent of the field around us, independent of all other beings, and a lack of recognition of our impermanence, coupled with that interdependence that is our truth. So this is something that a lot of people in the West are working with right now, this concept that our minds create our suffering, not necessarily some specific condition. And to a degree, that's true. The Western perspective on it is what I had just said, which is that we identify with the disease. And to some degree, that's definitely true. Our ego protects what it knows usually, because that has got us through from day to day. Even if it's hurting us, it's still keeping us alive. So we develop mechanisms of defense around it. So the
Can
shift.
you give me an example?
Yes.
I'm going to interrupt if you may.
Sure.
If I may, please, because I'm hearing quite a lot of things, but I'm trying to get it from a different I hear the words, it's definitely, I can feel it bumping up against what? So what I'm hearing is that I may have gone through life just, I'm clear as a Westerner, there's a lot of separation, and the system I was born into fosters a fear-based, separation-based identity. And an otherness, like you're in an objectness of regarding each other as even objects. So I can get as far as saying, all right, here's a mechanistic view of illness. I've got these different symptoms, I've got these different conditions, and I might even be able to say it goes as far as related to the food I eat. But it still is mechanistic. Fix this spark plug, change this piece. And when I'm done with the illness or injury, I'll go back to my life. Then there's what I'm going to call the holistic view. I've gotten this far of the illness or injuries cured, but it was a piece of my life, like a blip, a condition, a piece of it, an aspect. And then what's next is to sustain and maintain the new level of health. Let's see if I can do this. And then bring this system I call me to the next greater whole. Is that kind of a fair translation of what you're saying?
Sure, yeah, definitely. From the Aruyvedic perspective, there's two goals. One is to use the practice of healing as a spiritual journey. And the second is to be free enough to actually to reach coherence within the self, and then to take that coherence to other levels of being, to then bring it to societal, bring it to the family, bring it beyond yourself. And so where you are in that journey, you had freed yourself from certain identity. And I think more than saying it's an identity that's protecting your illness or creating the illness, you've thrown away part of your false identity. And so you're experiencing levels of freedom. And that's where the good, quote unquote, good feelings are coming from, is this truer sense of self that is a flux state. It's not some solid mass, which that solid mass becomes pretty impenetrable. It's pretty stuck. Most of us are basically statues. We're in a position, and you've basically animated that crude matter of a statue, and now you have freedom to move within that realm. Does that make sense?
It sort of does. It's really different, because a lot of us, myself included, take comfort in, this is who I am. I am this. And there's room in there for, this is kind of from the psychological perspective. And I'm a little on the, I'm just outside the mainstream realm of psychology in my composition. I've definitely begun to see myself as a composition. I've definitely begun to see, I am this, but the continuity of sense of self seems pretty important in the Western world anyway. And there's a little bit of room, a range of things can change. And then there's you go outside that range, and we call it an identity crisis. The idea of identity crisis I think, from listening to you, especially now, because you've said these things to me before, Michael, and I'm amazed how I'm hearing them differently today.
Mm.
I'm really amazed.
Mm.
So I think it should be kind of expectable. We don't expect identity crises. And that might sound kind of weird.
Mm.
I'm trying to find the common ground with what you're saying, because I get it, and then I lose it.
Mhm.
So am I making sense to you back?
Surely. So psychological growth is a spiral, and it depends where we are along that spiraling unfolding, how we'll hear things, and also what identity means at those levels. So you definitely need to develop an ego. It's a part of developing as a human. It's just a part of it. We all get to a point where the ego is kind of faulty programming. It's working against us more than it's working for us. And we're stuck in a groove. In Sanskrit, we use the word samskara, which means a groove in the sense of like a groove in a record. It's like a rut, and that usually looks like a certain way of holding our body, a certain tension in the field, which also has circulating thought patterns associated to it, and a specific way of breathing associated to it, specific ways of holding our hands. That's how our hands end up getting the lines on them. We hold our hands a certain way usually.
Well, I'll be.
And that'll leave specific impressions. That's how a palmist can go and look and read your life, basically, because they're reading your thoughts as they're imprinted on your hand.
My.
So yes, the ego is important to a degree. Once we've developed one, I think it was Alan Watts that said basically, we want to have an ego worthy of destroying before we destroy our ego.
But that makes good sense to me. Yes.
And the goal is not to end up ever in identity crisis. So the shift is eventually to go from I am ... to just I am. That's the goal. From at least our Western traditions, especially the Judeo-Christian, that I am is a powerful statement. In Sanskrit, it would be more like tattvamasi, which thou art that, meaning Brahma, meaning divinity, basically, that your essence is divinity. And for me, that means the personification of wholeness, holiness, wholeness. Identifying with that means that you're identifying with a flux, with the breath in a way. You're identifying with life coming in to you, circulating through you, life moving out of you. You're like a shore with the ocean washing upon you. Or you're really just the movement in the ocean. It's a very free identity. There's no rigidness to it. That ultimately is what enlightenment consists of, is identifying far beyond an individual entity, which you are. But it does involve an oscillation between that thou art that, I am consciousness, and everyday existence from this corporal realm also. So it's difficult to have this kind of conversation one-on-one with an audience, because you don't know where everyone in the audience is on that journey. It's easy to tailor what I say to an individual based on where they are, based on my reading of where they are. But it's hard to make blanket statements too easily. You can make very generic blanket statements like, for instance, it's our desires that lead to our suffering. And it's not the desires themselves, but it's not understanding the cause of our desires. So let's say we have a desire for cake, for instance. What does that desire really mean? We're desiring sweetness. Are we desiring nourishment? Maybe we're desiring love. Understanding the need behind the desire frees you from that desire. Doesn't free you in the sense of not needing it anymore, but frees you to find it in a wholesome, harmonious way for yourself. And maybe having that piece of cake is the wholesome, harmonious way. But if we're in that feedback loop of desire, fulfillment, and not understanding the causes and conditions behind that process, then we're building a groove where we're eating cake every night and we don't even know why, as opposed to seeing, oh, we're needing love, and then finding healthy ways to actually bring love into our life as opposed to just cake. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So let me see if I can do this. So first off, I understand I'm talking from more of a psychological paradigm. That's kind of I'm trying to learn over time to shift my words so they are more inclusive of the other dimensions of existence. Because as I've been learning, studying, growing as a clinical psychologist, meeting other people, blah, 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 all those, my clients, the words that I got trained in don't line up with a lot of what I'm present to. So I'm trying to expand that. Doesn't always work. But the thing I said about identity, and that, you go outside a range that we get used to or we're comfortable in here in Western world. But I did say, I am this, and then we have something outside it, and it's brittle. There's a brittleness, and you're talking, which results in identity crisis. And you're talking about a flow that could, a wave can go like this and a wave can go like this. Well, I've watched surfers. One of my colleagues a while back was a surfer, and he loved the big waves. I'm not so keen on the big waves. I'll stay here and watch the big waves. But there's other areas where, I'm great with the big waves and love them, So you're talking about something that's more elastic, flowing, maybe I could say dynamic, as a normal. And then I want to remind people, I want to make sure I'm hearing how you're using the word ego, how I've come to use it. A lot of spiritual communities or new age groups that I've come in contact with talk about the ego as a bad thing, and that you should get rid of the ego. And, a lot of understanding of ego, according to how Freud said it. Well, in my exposure, Freud's use of the word ego was I am. And there's a lot of mistranslation that came into America. And some of that mistranslation was deliberate. He meant the ego as comprehending the composition of yourself. This is kind of my translation, and a way of being in the world as a composition. Because I'm not the same as you. I'm just not. But he didn't mean it as in the, let's see, the ego had to do with your interface in the world. There's a lot of people who say identity and personality are the same. I do not. You can't separate them, front of the hand, back of the hand, but they are distinct. Personality has to do with your unique ways of interconnecting. And your identity is more, to simplify it, like your sense of self. So am I kind of does it sound like, because as you're talking, I'm aware that there's a lot of difference between your overarching movement with and comprehension of things and mine. I'm feeling mine as more rigid, static. It's really interesting because I didn't think of myself that way. And then I know you're talking about health. Anyway, am I kind of reflecting back, even though it's a different kind of language, am I reflecting back sort of what you're saying?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay.
It's worth noting that the psychological language and the psychological perspective are very important. It's actually what's missing from almost every spiritual tradition is how to grow up. We're taught how to quote unquote ascend, something along those lines, but there's a lack of really learning how to grow up. And
wow,
development in one is good, but development in both is much better. And so this is actually a whole field that exists now. It's called integral psychology. One of the forefathers of it is Ken Wilber.
Yeah.
And it's really fantastic stuff. So yes, the way I'm defining ego is a mechanism of self-defense. It's a way of perceiving threats and keeping the body safe, basically. And it's intertwined with our identity. We definitely cannot ever throw away the importance of uniqueness. Every person is especially unique, and that diversity is what keeps the whole healthy. It's the same as an ecosystem. The more biodiverse the ecosystem is, the healthier it is. The more diverse society is, the healthier it is. And consequently, the healthier our ecosystems will be also. So never is enlightenment falling into some homogeneous soup of everything's the same. The way to describe it is that no thing is greater than, equal to, or less than any other thing. Each individual entity is absolutely unique and deserving of reverence because of their simple existence. Just because they exist, there's a deserving of reverence. And it's from that reverence for all uniqueness that true harmony can arise. So I definitely do not agree with the idea of destroying the ego. I don't think it's possible. It's like whack-a-mole. You put it down somewhere, it's going to pop up somewhere else. I mean, I think we've all seen spiritually, like inflated spiritual egos. I think we've all seen that. People who have reached a lot of growth at certain levels, but are still quite ruled by their ego. And so it's not to destroy the ego, it's to befriend it. That's the idea. And that's what I mean by, basically, ego is desire. They go hand in hand. And so the better we understand our desires, the more wise we can be in the world. We've gotten pretty good at being clever in the world with our technologies and things along those lines, but we've lost our way of being wise in the world. And that comes more from the interface. Like you're saying, Freud's definition of ego being the interface. When we're existing at that level of interface with reality, then it's dynamic. We're in the flux again. We can tune into our senses and come back to our senses. Basically, we all need to come back to our senses. And we're not at the interface, we're in our face. You know, we're in our brains, compounding story based on everything that's happening. And it's actually a long list of causes that have led to that. It actually starts with agriculture and then led to specific types of language, especially written language, which led to a voice in our head. Without written language, it's not natural to have a dialogue in your head that's in words. You have a dialogue that's in colors and shapes and feelings. And we're not taking all this perception and convoluting it into story. But for better or worse, that's where we are now. We have all the benefits of written word too. It's not a bad thing. It just makes things more complicated. And the more complicated a system is, the more energy it takes to maintain it. And so we all have very complicated minds, and that takes tremendous effort to kind of I don't want to use the dominating word, to vibe with, kind of like to grok our minds. We need tremendous effort, but it's a simple effort. And basically, the more we can find the self outside of that story, the witness of all of what's happening, then we're empowered to start to change the patterning. So, yeah, does that make sense so far?
Yeah, I'm seeing, since I'm the one who started this whole dialogue with questions about health, I can see how what you're saying has to do with health, and that as a flow and a dynamic, what should I say, continuum.
Sure.
I can see that. Wow, you've said several things that are surprising. And I could talk to you, as I've said before, for hours on end. Since this is an hour program, I'm going to switch to my other question.
Okay.
That's very related, I think, but important. I've said this in the last week or two. I've heard a couple other people say that what I'm about to ask. So what has us know, especially in regards to health? We know what to do, and we don't do it. And that's assuming like no barriers to healthcare, plenty of money to buy your supplements and the kind of food you're supposed to eat and things like that. So, yeah, I want to start there because the example I'm going to put out, folks, is I need to be doing my own food prep a lot more. And I know what to do. I get all excited and find recipes that are very simple because I'm not a chef. I'm, simple things that would taste really good and I get excited about, I would enjoy having, as part of my meal or dessert or whatever. Do I do it? No. I know what to do. I know how to follow a recipe, even though I fudge around with recipes a lot. and I don't do it. And I don't want to do it. I'm very resistant to doing it.
Mhm.
So can you address that, Michael?
Yeah, certainly. This is described in the Vedas, especially within the Aruyvedic branch of the Vedas. So basically, there's described the primordial cause of disease, and then are described 3 kind of second tier causes of disease. The primordial cause is that ego identity, lack of understanding our true nature. There's many ways to describe it. But basically, this lack of understanding of who we really are. And that comes down to the ahamkar, which is your individual soul identity, being disjointed from your deep wisdom, being disjointed from the observer part of yourself, the part of you that can watch your thoughts. So the first thing is to identify more with that observer self. And the way of doing that is just through practice, through watching, through listening, through feeling, through tasting. And then the next 3 are time and motion. So the more time we spend in motion, the more the body decays. And this is specifically meaning the more that our thoughts move. There's something called vrittis, which are mental disturbances, winds of the mind. It's thought patterning. So basically, we can enter a state of neuroplasticity and have much more holistic wave patterns in our brain and much more holistic neural pathways formed, as opposed to the grooves that we typically form. That actually lengthens our telomeres. It not maybe lengthens, but stops the decay of them, which stops the decay of our DNA and gives us longevity. The second is unwholesome conjunction of the senses with the objects of their affection, which basically means being caught up in desire and trapped in desire, mired in desire, not understanding why we desire things and looking to fulfill the needs behind our desires. The third is what you just mentioned, prajnaparada, it's called, which means basically crimes against the wisdom. So in a sense, when you're witnessing that in action, it means you're pretty far along, because you've
Good news. It doesn't feel like it, but yeah.
Well, you have enough awareness of self to know that you're making the wrong choices. Like if you think of, so the woman I'm dating right now has a 7-year-old son, and it doesn't matter how many times you tell him to do something, like he's probably not going to do it. You know, it's just like, that's right where he is. To an extent, that little boy or little girl, the kind of bratty part of us, and I'm not calling him a brat, but that
it's true in many instances, so I'm not upset about it. So yeah, go ahead.
That bratty part of us is still alive and well. And archetype wise, that's the prince or princess, and they have not fully grown into their queen or king essence, you know, or I guess non-polar regalness. I mean, I don't mean to say only feminine or masculine, but when we're in our regal nature, we're in a state of reverence and a state of service. And so naturally, we move more toward doing harmonious activities, feeding ourselves well, because we view our body as a temple, and we know that the better fed we are, the more work we can do in the world to create a world as, you know, as your intention is. So where you are, it's just a natural part of the growth process. And you can foster that princess into a queen by sanctimoniously entering into the world, entering through your senses with reverence into daily activity. And it's little steps, like maybe brewing a cup of tea with a lot of ceremonial presence toward that. And then maybe that can expand to frying an egg with ceremonial presence, and maybe that then turns into eventually cooking your own dinner from, really well-sourced foods. And but it's baby steps, because it's a growth. It's we all have parts of ourselves that are still trapped at certain ages, and we have to grow those parts up.
That is so elegant. That is so elegant. Here's what I'm hearing in my reference points and words. I'm hearing that, I'm going to say it this way. We all have an innate, deep down, it may be very deep down. In Western culture, it may be very deep down. Understanding, comprehension, knowing that we are unique and essential in the universe, to creation. And it's personal and impersonal, but it's really important. We're not in touch with that very much and it's not encouraged in modern Western society. That's not something that's fostered. But I really assert that most of what drives people is when that's out of kilter, and that phrase, life will find a way, that's what's happening. We're trying to get back to a conscious and expressed knowing we're unique and essential. And I love the royalty kind of imaging, not only for the sort of the beautiful fairy tale-ness of it, but it's elegant. And anyone can have, we all know different stories of good kings or queens. If they're really good, they know how to be, I'm going to call it very holistic, like you said, in service, but also that in service means accepting the exemplary treatment that they get, because that helps sustain and maintain them to embody being the good regal person that they are. So in the literal sense, I'm never going to be a king or queen, but I can say, oh, I cook my own dinners, and I'll do the basics in a good fashion now. But the other is like doing there's extra food prep I could do. There's preparing breads according to, because I like bread. I don't want to live without bread, but I need to do it according to a certain pattern so that it is good for me. And if I want sweets, I'm going to have to do it like a lot of the ketogenic things. So if I do it from a place of reverence of myself, that shifts my relationship to it entirely. And I'm using that to give people a specific example, but I've also had the same thing going on with walking enough, or exercising, whatever. I've had glitches there too. So I'm just trying to make it relatable, and you all can fill in your blanks around it. But the regalness, the I am worthy kind of what you're presencing. I am worthy, and the reason I'm worthy is because I have so much to provide, and providing makes me worthy, which makes me provide. It then becomes what I'm going to call a biofeedback loop. And it's also spiral as we live and grow and change. Is that a sufficient translation of what you just said?
Really, yeah.
Wow.
And you could go even further.
Okay.
First, you said you will never be a queen in real life, right? But you have an entire queendom at your disposal. You have
Perfect.
the whole realm of your body and the sphere that it's encircled by. So you're always interfacing with an entire universe, the Deborah.
Wow.
And you are the queen of that. And so, yes, there's the tyrannical king or queen archetype, and that is basically still prince or princess. It hasn't actually grown up. It has power, but it doesn't own the power.
It has power granted, but not owned, which if you own that kind of power, you can't escape the awareness that each of your subjects is also unique and essential.
Right. I mean, ultimately, the king or queen is the grand serf. They're the ultimate servant. And so the other part where you could go further is you're deserving of this treatment because you are worthy, because you are providing. You could cut all that out and just say, you deserve regal treatment because you are. Because I deserve worthy. I am worthy because I am. And that's enough. Just existing is enough. Life is sacred. And to be alive is sacredness in action. It's divinity in form.
Oh, life is sacredness in action. Divinity in form. Wow. Okay. Okay. Keep going. This is profound for me and hopefully for you viewers. Go ahead.
So you're worthy just by being. And some of us need to say I'm worthy because of something. That's where we are. And that's okay. But ultimately, the truth is all of us are worthy just because we are. And the more we act that way, the more that ripples out into the world. And the more we create a world where we all recognize our innate worthiness based on the fact that we exist alone, just that.
All right. The things that you're saying are actually opening me up into quite a lot today. Hopefully also for you viewers. And I didn't expect it to go this way. So this is wonderful. Wow. Okay. I'm not sure. So basically, to say it back, life is sacredness in motion, divinity in form. I'm still back there. That was really something. That does make a lot of difference in the regard for my life and others' lives. I'm saying my life just for the purpose of this conversation, but it is about others as well. And therefore the choices I make. Because if I was interacting with, let's say, my child when they were little, I would make certain choices knowing that that was better for them than something else. And it may or may not line up with their immediate preference, their immediate gratification preference. But I would know that it would be about the, care and tending of that. And then that expands out to everywhere. I can see, wow, this is really amazing. So I'm trying to think what I want to reflect on the most. So what has us know what to do than not be or do it really is tangled up in we're not clear that our life is sacred.
Exactly.
And we are divinity in form walking around on the planet. And then that also interrupts something that I've been watching happen with a lot of people, myself included, is that life is good or bad based or, difficult, working, not working, based on circumstances. Now, admittedly, probably nobody likes circumstances like a financial challenge, or yesterday I had to take my dog to the vet and there may be some challenges with that. What else? People can just, whatever's going on in life. A lot of people are being very challenged right now, including exacerbation of health issues, whatever. And I've noticed that, in myself included, our attention gets jerked by the circumstance. My attention used to. But something shifted, particularly in the last week, and particularly yesterday with being with my dog at the vet, that somehow something happened, that the circumstances were no longer jerking my attention, and the circumstances were not necessarily defining if my life was good or bad. Now, I'm sitting there at the vet. I'm not getting very good news at the moment. We'll see what happens as things play out. So I have a lot of feelings about it. But I noticed that that was not the same as the circumstance defining whether my life was good or bad. Or even an accumulation of circumstances. For a lot of people lately, it's just been like one hit after the other in terms of circumstances. But it's not the same distraction that it was 2 weeks ago. So I'm asserting that there's enough people in this journey that are just waking up to life is sacred and I'm divinity in form, walking around on this planet. What do you think of that? And we've got like 8 minutes, so yeah. I just landed a big one on you, Michael.
Yeah, no, that's beautiful. Let me mop up a couple of things real quick, and then I'll come back to this. Basically, equanimity and community, those are the ideas of what I want to say here. But to just mop up real quick, yes, we have to hold the hand of the inner child and guide it. And at the same time, we also need to be the inner child and reclaim our innocence and our playfulness and our curiosity. It's both and. Sometimes you're gonna try to talk yourself into staying up to 1 a.m. watching TV or something.
Yeah.
But you know that the inner child of you needs to go to bed at 10 or whatever it is.
Yeah.
But that inner child also wants to take you out to play. And so it's a directing the inner child, and it's also a listening to the inner child. Those both sides of that coin are really important for bringing sacredness into practice. So much I could say there, but the what you're describing is the state of equanimity when faced with certain causes and conditions outside, not getting pulled up and down with the waves, but surfing through them. That dynamic identity, as we were calling it at the beginning, that's equanimity. And that is isness. That is sacred being. And so when you're in the state of recognizing sacredness, there is an equanimity. There's so much trust that you're not thrown by what happens in life. That said, of course, we need our basic needs met, and you really can't have enlightened life without those. That's why the Buddha was always talking, he would say, those with a life of leisure, meaning your basic needs are met. You have time now to actually be active in creating a world, and the best way for us to meet our needs is for like-minded individuals who are grown up enough to see the world this way, to start to build together. That way, there's less need on these false systems in place. We're more independent because of recognizing our interdependence. And so we can, like, I've got it pretty good in the community I've worked to foster here with many others. I have all the food I need from the hands of friends, and that's one piece of the puzzle, but it's an example of something that's actually pretty easy to create if people start to come together. And so community, like, unity is coherence, and that's what coherence starts to look like. It starts to look like farmers markets and support groups, and I mean, this is an example. And yeah, I think that addresses what you said, but does that feel like I did?
Yeah, I really prefer things brought back to the rubber meets the road. Here's what it means in daily life. And so you've just provided that, and I appreciate it very, very much. And then everybody watching can see what that is for them in daily life. They can equate it. And to me, that elevates anybody's self-perception and anybody's comprehension of their stature and place in the world, which has nothing to do with what type of job do you have, or what's your income, or what some of the more traditional, conventional markers of success, which can be quite valid, but it's a matter of, have I chosen that that's valid for me? Because these other things are also markers of great stature. Just like you said, just being alive is a marker. Wow. That's very profound. That's very profound. We've got 2 minutes. What else would you like to add, if anything, Michael, in that little bitty piece of time?
Yeah, I mean, there's 2 general remedies for fostering this identity that is more the witness, more in alignment with divinity. One is just spending time in nature. That's infallible, apart from getting mauled or injured, or but those are very rare instances. Otherwise, just being present in nature gets us back to our senses, and the more we can actively be in our sensorial field at the interface of reality in a natural setting. And really, nature is everywhere. You don't have to go very far to do that. The other is our breath. It's the bridge between the body and the mind. So for us to get out of the perpetual cycle of thought, just watching the breath come in and out, like watching waves roll in and out at the shore. That those 2 things really help foster this dynamic identity.
Wow, that's powerful. And even there, that was a gift. You shifted my relationship to the breath and the um, different breathing exercises or techniques that I've been present to. Thank you. That was profound. I appreciate that a lot. All right, everybody. The hour's up. Thank you for being with us. Thank you very much, Michael, for everything you shared. This was really something for me. I hope for everyone else. So have a blessed day, everybody.